I think when you quit being a biologist, you had like $65,000 in the bank. Why decide to go alone to the Arctic?
You know, I had saved up $65,000, and to me at that point it was an endless supply of money. But,
Yeah.
but photography is very expensive. You know, just to buy my big lens is $12,000. You know, to buy a new body is $4,000, a new camera body. So I mean, you can go through that money very quickly. But you know, to back up, is when I left my job, I needed to essentially go, I hate to say it, but find myself, or to go process. And I was angry, I was frustrated. I remember.
Angry at what?
Just at the world, at life, at the government, you know, frustrated that I wasn't living my dream. I wasn't on this path with purpose. And I got this small grant to go on this expedition. I think the government gave me $8,000 as an artist grant. And I bought, you know, 200 pounds of food. I took my camera gear, I took my camping gear, I took my lifetime of knowledge of being out on the land, being out in the wild, and went up to a community called Inuvik, which is up on the Arctic Ocean, and I had him fly me a couple hundred miles or 300 miles out in the middle of the Barren Lands in May. It was icy and cold and just basically winter, and he landed me on a frozen lake, and he dropped me off there with all my supplies. And I took all 600 pounds of gear out of his little airplane, had a sled to pull things around, and I'd stopped in on the way to a trapper's camp to pick up an inflatable canoe. I didn't even know if it would work. And I began this 3-month journey of living alone on the Barren Lands.
How far were you from civilization?
I can't even remember, but because you know we didn't have GPS back then. But I was.
But far.
Like you could never walk. You were alone. And I just remembered this. The first couple of days when I put up my big tent and I'm sitting there with all my gear and it's just deafening quiet. A storm settled in like a blizzard, and I was just started to, like a little moment of depression of like, what the heck am I doing? What I just left my job and I'm sitting here in the middle of nowhere, and like, now what, loser? You know, what are you gonna do? And I remember just, I find from being, you know, so frustrated with my work that I had all these little voices in my head, and they were always, you know, sort of saying, you're gonna fail. And you know, everybody who'd sort of told me I was gonna fail if I left my job, I had these little voices nagging me. And I remember just sitting out there on the tundra and you know, being really concerned and scared and worried and questioning everything. And all of a sudden, after being out there for 2 weeks, I almost slipped back to my childhood, where I entered into this meditative state of being out in nature again, and everything calmed down. I started to see, you know, wolves and bears and falcons flying around and eagles, and all of a sudden I started to feel home again. And then all of a sudden the ice broke up and the river came to life, the Big Horton River dumping ice out to the ocean. And I started to get my equipment ready to go on this expedition, and sort of all this negativity started to leave me. And just sort of as a joke, I remember my wife at the time knew I was at a low point before this expedition, and I had mentioned to her that, you know, at 3 a.m. while I'm sitting there packing, eating a big bag of gummy bears, that, you know, I was watching this dude on TV I'd never heard of named Anthony Robbins, and I, you know, I just mentioned it to her. So as a joke, she kind of slipped his book into my gear, and as I'm unpacking all my gear out there, I come across this book by Awaken the Giant Within, and it couldn't have been better, because as I'm sort of working through all these emotions, all of a sudden here's goal setting again. Here is if you know, you can't hold a negative thought for more than 10 seconds. If you do, you have to start over. And I did these things as I'm reading this book, and all of a sudden it took me 30 days to do the 10 days without a negative thought. And all of that played a key role. And by the end of the expedition, after 3 months, I remember being out there, I lost 50 pounds, and just hiked over 1,000 kilometers. I paddled hundreds of kilometers. I turned into this fitness machine out there, you know, being out there in nature. And the goal setting that I'm doing, I didn't bring a big scrapbook, but I was writing on everything I could, planning out my future again, and all that affirmation started to bubble to the surface again, that I knew exactly what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I couldn't have had that clear time to think and reflect and be out there in fresh air.